Okay, well, my name is Annabel, and I am from a family of artists. I have a great uncle, Sir Edwin Lutyens, who was an architect. His father and his brother were well-known artists who have. His father had paintings in the National Gallery in London. He was a portrait artist of people and of animals. So I've always been brought up around a lot of art. And then on my mother's side, she's into horticulture. And she trained in horticulture in the mid-50s, which was quite unusual for a female of that time. And so I've always been sort of surrounded by horticulture and art. Then when I left school, I went to an agricultural college and I trained in horticulture. But there was always a side of me because I loved my art in school. I had some fantastic art teachers. It was a very musical, artistic school. And I missed that side. So I've always sort of gone back to, well, I became a florist, which is basically creation with flowers. And then sort of long and the short of it is I sort of ended up in London as the florist, and I did flowers for Duke and Duchess of York, Tiffany's the jeweler, Harrods, a lot of wonderful stuff, big creative stuff. And then I travelled for several years, ended up in New Zealand, and opened up my own flower shop. And I didn't want to have things like stuffy toys and sort of floral stuff. So I started weaving. I looked at a whole bunch of magazines and I saw an incredible artist called Serena de la Haye, and she created these big figures running out of fields and just amazing. So living in New Zealand, going back to visit my family in England, I started to incorporate that by visiting other weaving artists. So Serena was the first artist I visited in Taunton, Somerset, who lived close to my mother. And so I went to see her studio and how she did things. And I was just trying to weave, but I found things like spheres, they lost their sphericalness over within sort of 6-7 months. But Serena used to use metal armatures. So this is when I started to introduce wire into my sculptures to hold their shape. And then another year I went back and I learned how to make coracles with another artist called Peter Faulkner. And coracles are boats that are circular, and they were used mainly in the fens. And you could pick the boat up, walk across a piece of land, then put it back into the water again. But what was fascinating, it was like a big giant basket with a cowhide stitched onto it. So, which is like the early currachs. This is how people used to get from Ireland to Wales and backwards and forwards by using either seal skin or cattle skin or, stitching things up. So this was quite a little sort of adventure. And then another trip I did back to England, I did a workshop with Julianne Worrell Hood. And she really showed me how to make armatures of figures. So I was doing circular armatures before, and then suddenly I was making chickens, and then, which is very Okanagan, quail. And that's where it just opened up my whole sort of ability to create. So therefore I've sort of done quail, moose heads. I can really now weave three-dimensional animals and birds, but birds sort of seem to be something I keep coming back to. And it's interesting because my sister is a bronze sculptor, and she very much works on birds as well. So we've independently come back to the same format, which is quite interesting. Yeah. So and then coming to the Okanagan, and I grow grapes. And I have an abundance of vine canes, so it's just like, instead of willow, got to use with what's out there. So that's where I really started doing the vine cane spheres. And a sphere on itself, it can be a piece of garden, ornamentation, it can be. But what I love doing is that the group of spheres actually becomes an artistic sort of, piece, rather than, the individual in a group is how it comes about. Well, usually in the middle of the night, with the mind just whizzing round. And again, I don't believe that any idea is a totally original idea. It's always sparked off by something else that you've seen. I used to subscribe to a magazine called Gardens Illustrated, which is where I first saw Serena de la Haye's sculptures. And so I'm constantly sort of getting my inspiration from nature, from gardens, from material that, the natural fiber that I can use. And then suddenly I'll see something will spark off, and I love to hike. And I hike all over the Okanagan. I've got 2 dogs, and they I don't know if they're lucky or I'm lucky to have them around. But as I'm walking, I'm constantly processing it through, and you see the most beautiful tree stumps. And I mean, nature, it really is my inspiration. So then I'll start to get the idea, and then I'll probably gather some materials together. I'll take my snippers when I'm out hiking, and I'll come back with some alder and some moss and some all sorts of things. My ex-husband used to say, whatever I want, I hike out. I'm struggling out of the bush with all sorts of things. But then I'll start to work out what is flexible. Does it work with my idea? If I make an armature of, say, a quail, anything too thick, like the vinekins and things, it doesn't work. It has to be small stuff, like willow and sort of smaller stuff. But as I get bigger and as I do a larger project, then I can use bigger materials. And then, so very much the materials decide on what I'm going to create. So it's a natural sort of process that comes through. Well, the irony is that math is not my strong point. So I've discovered sacred geometry and actually want to do an exhibition with it. Has made me chuckle. But the beauty of sacred geometry is how artistic it is and how visual it is. And I am definitely very visual. My mother always says she has a photographic memory. And I think to a certain degree, whatever I think about, I see it in a visual sort of 3-dimensional sort of space. And then, sacred, I was introduced to it probably a couple of years ago. And I really started to sort of work it out, and just the plain starting with a simple circle. I was inspired by, he was an artist, Alex Lieberman, who ended up as, he worked for Condé Nast Publishing. He came from Russia in the early 1918. He escaped the revolution. Anyway, he escaped just pre-Second World War through Lisbon and came to New York. So he's a very interesting artist and publisher. And he wrote a very interesting piece about the circle. And I won't go into the exact his total explanation, but it is all about the infinity of the circle. It starts and finishes in exactly the same place. You look at the sun, you look at the moon, you look at all these things, and really it is the circle of life. We are born, we live, we die. Everything seems to be in a circular sort of way. So this is how I sort of came to it. Sacred geometry is the circle, and then you take the radius of the diameter, split into even six pieces on the diameter. You can then get 6 circles around that, and then it progresses. So sacred geometry is not only representative in Middle Eastern architecture. The Greeks sort of kept it very much, they call it sacred because it explained a lot about life, but they kept it sacred so that it was a hierarchy of thought. And then you take sacred geometry into nature, and you have the flower, you have the sunflower and the eternity of the sunflower, and you have like 6 petals, and you have and the sacred geometry goes on, and then it goes on into the 12 apostles, and if you look at the passion flower, you've got the whole story of the passion within the passion flower, and then the 3 nails, and then that goes into the 6, and then into the 12. So it's a fascinating thing that keeps coming back again and again and again. So that's how I came about it. The honeybee, everybody thinks of the bee as being the honeybee. But the honeybee here in the Okanagan is only like 4% of the population of bees. About 96%, I might be slightly wrong in my percentages, but certainly in the 90s, about 96% of the bees here are wild bees, native bees, and they are as important for the pollination of all our species as the honeybee. But if you look at, I've woven in this exhibition, I've woven a bee skep, which is traditionally, it's woven out of rye straw because it's got an insulation to it. It has an empty bottom, so it's like a basket, and a little small hole for the bees to come in and out of. And an apiarist would use these. They'd put a block underneath them. They'd transport the bees to the orchards for pollination and things. They'd move them around. And then in winter, they'd stack the hives back up in little shelving in a nice protected area of warmth for the bees just to, to see out the winter. And then they bring them out again. And the heat within the hive is just beautiful. So I've woven a larger scale bee skep out of Carl Forester grasses that's been gathered from local landscapers. I put the word out, and ironically, it was all female landscapers that came back to me and said, I've got Carl Forester grasses, and I have now a big pile of them. And so I wove this big giant bee skep. And inside the actual hive, if you think of the hive of a bee, in the actual cells, it's six-sided. So it always comes back to 666 sort of thing. So it's so it's incorporating the flowers, it's incorporating architecture, it's within the bees, and bees are just so important to our existence. It's the circle of life. Okay, well, I am such a tactile, hands-on sort of artist. You might have noticed my hands all going like this. And I've created this sort of exhibition so that people can actually interact with it as well. The bee skep that I have woven, you can actually look inside, and I've woven a little honeycomb out of willow, and I've put little wire bees inside so that people can really feel like they can look inside and feel it. Then I've got a lot of spheres woven out of vine canes here from the Okanagan, from specifically my vineyard. And I want people to come in and I want them to move those spheres around. #MoveTheSpheres. And through the season, I'm going to add more pieces to the exhibition, so that it's not just a static display where people just come, they look, and they go, oh, that's nice, I've seen it once this year. I want people to continue to come back again and again and interact. And I think by being part of the art exhibit, I think children will really enjoy it. I think adults really enjoy it. I've had several people who've come back to me and said, this is really fun, and we just did this and we just did that. I want it to be a fun thing to be part of and to appreciate what this is all about.